Peninsula all the way up into southern France. It was looked at as the colonization of Christendom. And within that period, the kind of terms that developed were terms such as the term raza or raza. And raza referred to breeds of dogs, horses, and Jews and Moors. So you could see, and raza is the word from which we get the word race. So the thing that's tricky here is Jews and Afro-Muslims were at the moment of the formation of the concept of race. The thing that's weird, though, is the word raza was from the Arabic word ra, which is related to the Hebrew word rosh, which means head, or the Amharic ras. And you put all that together, it also refers to origin or beginnings. So you can see the term was connected to the experience in Christendom of people who are supposed to be outside coming in. Well, this term, when Columbus landed, had to be expanded because the world also now had Native Americans. It also had lots of people who were neither Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. And this began to take form in terms of explanations that led to some of the modern issues we have today. But the complicated thing is, even with those issues around race, what this tells you is race is something that comes onto you, not something that comes out of you. And once we realize that, it can explain why people could be surprised that as they travel through the world, they're one race in one place and they're a different race in another. Well, the Tobins were very aware of this. And they tried to, it's interesting that their work did not only involve reaching out, but bringing in by actually having people move through the world. Because those communities of Jews who were meeting, when I met them, were experiencing the same thing I experienced. It's one thing to hear about the Lemba in theory. It's another thing to hear about the Ibu Jews in theory. It's another thing to hear about Mizrahim, to hear about Abba Yudaya in theory. It's another thing to have flesh and blood looking you in the face and telling you his or her experience. But the complicated thing about this issue now is, how do people really meet across races? And this is one of the issues that the Tobins were bringing up. They were bringing up how the interrogating of Jewish life and its relation to race needed to be done. Because as we know, it's not simply the question that Judaism is a religion. Most rabbis would explain, if that were really so, then secular Jews are just not Jews. But no rabbi takes seriously the idea that a secular Jew isn't a Jew. Because the rabbis work within an understanding, a cultural understanding of what a people are and the ways in which those things can connect. And this complicated relationship is what they were trying to articulate, to point out the idea of what it is to look at Jewish life as a living reality. Now, the living reality plays out in strange ways. And what do I mean? Well, I was just reflecting with Capers about my visits to Israel. And it's a funny thing when you go to Israel. And what I mean by this is, one time when I was in Israel, before that I spoke at a conference in Jamaica of Caribbean and Latin American Jews. And when I spoke at this meeting of Caribbean and Latin American Jews, well, the audience looked just like this room, okay? And I took a lot of pictures, and and because it just looked like my family. My family are pretty much, my mother's family were from Irish Jews, and my mother's father's family, my mother's father's family were from Jews from Jerusalem. And we look at the picture, the thing that's funny is, in my childhood, never, ever, ever, ever was my mother's family called white. Never, ever. My entire consciousness of them was just that they were light-skinned black people. You see what I'm getting at? So what's funny was, I took pictures, and what's interesting is, when I go to Israel, and I show the pictures, some of the friends were saying, which ones are the blacks? And what this tells you is something interesting about race. If you define a group of people in a way that you want to expand the concept of whiteness, you're going, I'm sorry, if you're going to center the concept of whiteness, it tends to exclude a lot of people. What's interesting, if you define it in terms of the concept of blackness, it tends to include a lot of people. It's very interesting how these race concepts work. Now, how do I know this? Well, if I show the same pictures to many black people, they'll see a lot of black people in the room. They'll see a small number of white people. But if you're white-centered, you're going to try to see more white people in the room. And so what this tells you is something interesting. I meet many people in Israel who, most of Israel are immigrants, who the country they're coming from, they were not white people. But in Israel, they're white people. And then when they leave Israel to another country, they become colored people again. All right? And I know this because I know people, for instance, in the academy, who did Aliyah to Israel, who then came here, and they're on faculty as people of color in many universities. So they know what they are. Now, when I say they know what they are, I don't mean what they are is fixed. What I mean is, we understand Jewish people as a people who are always negotiating race. You see what I'm getting at? So in some contexts, you're a light-skinned black person, or you're a Latina, or you're a Southwest Asian. In another context, you may find that. I am shocked at how many things I have been in terms of what people think I am over the years. Right now, I was joking, with my beard this way, you know, I could really hang out in, this is a Philly joke, I could hang out in Germantown with no problem, you know. I just need a knitted. But, you know, when I'm shaved, you know, when I first came to Temple, I was shaved. There were students who kept saying to me, so how long have you been in this country? I'm thinking. And then I'm thinking, okay, you know. So, you know, they said, so do you miss India? And, you know, and I was like, India? And I remember I went to my grandmother and said, you know, these days I supposedly miss India. And my grandmother, you gotta, it's so sad when we lose the elderly in our lives. And if you have elderly parents alive, talk to them. My grandmother quickly said, well, you know. It turns out that her mother's paternal side, her mother's paternal grandmother was a slave from Pondicherry, India. That's why it was so funny when I was at one of the Bekola show meetings, they kept saying, stand up if you're descended from people from this place. Stand up. I had to stand up every time. Right? And, you know, this brings out this interesting part. I remember once I was on a bus, and a Pashtun came up to me and was trying to talk to me. He said I was from her village, and I said, I'm not. And I told her I'm not. And then finally she got angry and said, oh, these people come to the United States. She told me off, humiliated me in the bus, you know? Yeah. But this brings out this point, right? You know, the way we define each other affects how we see each other. You know, if everybody in this room suddenly had a birth certificate that said you were black, let's say, it's interesting how people will see you. You know, they'll look at you, and I guarantee you, they'll see the blackness in you. They'll see it, they'll see from the way you walk, talk, eat, dance, everything. You will become black. And if they define you in such a way, you have this little certificate that says you're white, they'll suddenly be saying, well, you know, what? They'll start seeing the whiteness in you. And you could define any other category. So this fluidity